He was called Africa's lion by Barack Obama, but when he vanished in silence, what followed shook an entire continent. The world had turned its gaze toward Africa, but not for the usual reasons. On the edge of political chaos and global pressure, one name kept surfacing: Ibrahim Traore. A young revolutionary leader in Burkina Faso, he had risen not by bloodline, but by sheer will. While many questioned his defiance against international systems, others saw in him something ancient, unyielding, raw, and honest. But no one expected his name to leave the lips of Barack Obama. It happened during a quiet forum in Cape Town. The press thought it would be a generic appearance, a talk about youth, leadership, and democracy. Instead, it became a moment that redefined how the world viewed African resistance. Barack Obama stood calmly at the podium, dressed in a simple gray suit, speaking to a room full of students and leaders. For most of the speech, he spoke about progress, unity, and digital transformation. But then, unprompted, he paused. His tone shifted, and with the weight of a global conscience, he said, "In every generation, a lion rises, not to be liked, but to be heard. Today, that lion walks in Burkina Faso. His name is Ibrahim Traore." The room froze. Cameras captured the silence, the stunned expressions, and the sudden explosion of claps that followed. Obama didn't elaborate. He moved on as if the words were simply truth. But truth, when spoken at the right time, can ignite a storm. Within hours, the quote was trending globally. Africa's lion. Obama Traore moment. Lion of Burkina news anchors debated its meaning. Twitter erupted with praise, anger, satire, and celebration. Western analysts asked if Obama had endorsed a controversial military figure. African youths saw it differently. To them, it was a validation of a struggle centuries old, a moment when the West finally recognized power not wrapped in suits and diplomacy, but born in rebellion and conviction. In Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traore received the news in silence. He was in a meeting with local farmers discussing water distribution and food reserves. An aide leaned in, whispering the statement. Traore paused, lowered his head, and said nothing. But those near him would later say that something shifted in his eyes, like the echo of a name he had carried in secret had just been said aloud. By sunset, artists were painting murals of lions across walls in Cotonou, Dakar, and Nairobi. Young boys carried stickers. Elders retold the quote on village radios. And somewhere in Washington, D.C., a group of officials debated the geopolitical ripple effect of Obama's words. But for ordinary Africans, it wasn't about diplomacy. It was about dignity. Someone had spoken the truth. Not everyone was pleased. Western governments scrambled to interpret the statement. Obama's former aides issued clarifications. He didn't mean an endorsement, one analyst insisted. It was metaphorical. But it was too late. The lion had been named. Editorials swirled. Some praised Obama's courage to recognize African sovereignty. Others accused him of destabilizing narratives carefully crafted over decades. International firms delayed investments in Burkina Faso, unsure if the political landscape had become too volatile or too independent. Meanwhile, Ibrahim Traore remained silent. He didn't issue a statement. He didn't attend press conferences. He continued his work, visiting schools, restructuring military protocols, and enforcing his policy of zero foreign interference in natural resource contracts. And yet, every camera now followed him. Every step, every word was recorded. Every silence was dissected. In the rural hills, old griots began telling stories not just of colonizers or kings, but of a lion who refused to kneel before the jungle of politics. And somewhere, quietly watching, from afar, Obama smiled. Not because he had caused chaos, but because he had dared to say what needed to be said. A year later, a statue was unveiled in Burkina Faso, an iron lion standing over a globe, its eyes set toward the future. Carved, beneath its paw was the quote, "That lion walks in Burkina Faso." Barack Obama tourists came to take photos. Activists came to pay respect. Even school children began referring to their country as the lion's land. But for Ibrahim Traore, the honor was never the goal. The work remained unfinished. He visited the statue once, at dawn, alone, in a long coat, the sun rising behind him. No ceremony, no entourage, just a man standing before an idea too large for one lifetime. He didn't stay long, because lions don't rest in praise. They keep walking, and somewhere across the world, on digital walls and village tongues, the name Ibrahim Traore echoed, not just as a soldier, not just as a president, but as the lion whose roar was finally heard. The fire didn't fade after Obama's words. It spread. Universities across Africa began offering case studies on Traore's leadership. Protesters in other nations lifted his portrait beside historical revolutionaries. Music artists recorded verses praising the lion. Even children's storybooks quietly replaced kings with lions bearing his name. But with admiration came enemies. Behind marble doors in world capitals, powerful men whispered his name with unease. Ibrahim Traore had become more than a president. He had become a symbol. And symbols, unlike governments, are hard to control. They tried strategy first, offers, summits, trade leverage masked as friendship. They said his people would starve without the West. He responded by turning to neighboring nations and building new alliances rooted in mutual survival, not dependence. They tried propaganda next, leaked reports, Western think pieces titled The Lion's Teeth questioning his every move, accusations of suppression, anti-democratic rule, financial mishandling, but even those who disliked him couldn't look away. He had ignited something. In Zimbabwe, a young woman led a protest waving a flag with a lion across it. In Haiti, graffiti read, "Let our lion rise too." In rural Liberia, a farmer named his son Traore, hoping he'd walk without fear. Ibrahim knew this was larger than him now. Then came the letter. It arrived through unofficial channels, handwritten, no seal, no signature. But the ink was unmistakably American, and the voice unmistakably Obama's. Symbols live longer than leaders, Ibrahim, but they also weigh heavier. Carry it carefully. Let the roar be strength, not destruction. No politics, no request, just wisdom passed from one history maker to another. Traore read it alone in his study, then folded it and placed it beneath a faded photo of his mother, the woman who once told him, "They will fear your voice before they know your name." He understood what Obama meant. The lion had awakened the people. But lions could be hunted too. Weeks later, a convoy was intercepted. 3 men posing as UN contractors were arrested near the northern border. Inside their truck were surveillance devices, encrypted maps, and one chilling item, a sniper rifle engraved with French markings. It wasn't the first time, but it was the closest. His advisors begged him to scale down public appearances, cancel speeches, mute the fire. But Traore refused. "If I disappear into silence, the lion dies." He spoke louder, but he moved smarter. He established a civilian tech corps to monitor national infrastructure. He opened a school for African journalism, and he launched a Pan-African youth network called ROAR, teaching self-reliance, history, and digital literacy, arming the next generation not with guns but with truth. Enemies grew bolder, but so did hope. On the anniversary of Obama's now iconic speech, Traore announced a national unity march. No guards, no armored vehicles, just people, millions, walking with him through the capital's oldest streets. Drone footage captured the sea of citizens dressed in lion print shirts, holding handmade signs. "We are all Ibrahim now. Let Africa roar." Thank you, Obama. That day there were no bombs, no attacks, just unity so powerful it suffocated fear. And in the final stretch of the march, an American film crew caught a brief moment. A little boy on his father's shoulders shouting, "That's him. That's the lion." And Ibrahim Traore, in his military boots and plain shirt, turned, smiled, and waved. No thrones, no medals, just a lion walking with his people. The day would be remembered, Not just for what Obama said, but for what Africa did with it, for how a name became a spark, for how a leader became a symbol not of domination but of dignity. Years later, a bronze sculpture stood outside the African Union building. It wasn't of Traoré's face. It was of a lion, standing quietly beside a barefoot child. The plaque read, "Let the lion guide us, not to conquer, but to remember who we are." In honor of a man who chose voice over violence, power over praise, people over fear, and as history would write it long after cameras faded and enemies tried again, the lion never died. He simply taught others how to roar. News cycles moved on. New scandals erupted across continents. Social media drifted to the next trend. And just like that, the lion who once roared across the world was left in silence again. But silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's where the real work begins. Ibrahim Traore knew this. He had watched history repeat itself enough times to understand that attention was a double-edged sword. It made heroes, but it also made targets. So, as the world looked elsewhere, he rebuilt. Not headlines, not performances, systems. He ordered schools to be constructed where there were none, paid for by gold reserves once hoarded for foreign contracts. He formed women-led councils to audit corruption in regional offices. He opened Burkina Faso's first climate adaptation lab, run entirely by under-25s. Quiet revolutions, no interviews, no cameras, just policy. Elsewhere in Africa, others were watching, some with admiration, others with envy, and a few with fury. A neighboring country, a long-standing regime collapsed after student-led protests waved signs quoting Obama's lion speech. In another, soldiers refused orders to fire on crowds shouting Traoré's name. The fear was spreading, not of war but of awakening. Powerful families began funding campaigns to discredit him. Articles reappeared accusing him of strongman. Tactics, meaning anonymous sources, leaked evidence of state-controlled narratives, but none of it stuck. Because by now, the people didn't need propaganda to believe. They had roads now, water in their villages, medical clinics that charged nothing. They didn't worship Traoré. They trusted him, and that was far more dangerous. One morning, Ibrahim received a package. No name, no return address. Inside was a letter written in careful handwriting, childish but clear. "Dear Mr. Traoré, my name is Elsie. I live in Alabama. My school teacher told us about what Mr. Obama said about you. My daddy said you are brave. I think you are kind because you help people. I drew you something. Love, Elsie." Folded inside was a crayon drawing of a lion with a flag behind it, and little stick figures smiling underneath. He held that paper longer than he held any award. It reminded him that even across oceans, across politics and propaganda, children still understood what most adults forgot. That leadership wasn't about ruling, it was about protecting. It happened quietly, a sniper disguised as a camera technician during a diplomatic summit in Bamako. The bullet missed, but just barely. It embedded into the podium. Traoré didn't flinch. He finished his speech, as security tackled the shooter. That night, he stood alone on the roof of the embassy, looking at the stars. Not afraid, but aware. The lion once praised was now being hunted again. But even lions rest only to rise stronger. He doubled down, not on vengeance, but preparation. He built a digital shield, an intelligence network powered by former hackers, whistleblowers and thinkers, some of whom had once fought him. Now they protected him, because ideas are harder to kill than men. On the 3rd anniversary of Obama's speech, there was no parade. No national broadcast, just a single message posted on a rarely used government site. It read, "You once said a lion walks in Africa, but lions don't walk alone forever. The herd is growing, the hunt is changing. Few noticed it, but the ones who did, they understood it wasn't just about Ibrahim anymore. It was about a continent stirring beneath centuries of weight. Years later, a film would be made about his life. Actors would play his rise, his silence, Obama's speech, the marches, the bullet that missed. But what the film wouldn't show were the little things. The village boy who got a math scholarship because a lion opened a school. The mother who stopped selling her daughter to traffickers because she now earned enough weaving cotton for a local co-op. The father who built a small hospital using a grant the lion never took credit for. Because Ibrahim Traore never wanted to be remembered as a roar. He wanted to be remembered as the moment a continent realized it didn't need permission to rise, and perhaps that's why even in silence the lion still echoes. Africa had always carried the weight of other people's stories. Colonizers, kings, corporations, they wrote the scripts, set the stage, and handed out roles. But after Ibrahim Traore was called Africa's lion by Barack Obama, something irreversible began. Not a revolution in fire, a revolution in self-worth. His words, his walk, his silence, they had awakened something across the continent. In Cameroon, teenagers turned defunct factories into solar labs. In Ghana, local journalists formed alliances to investigate land grabs. In Nigeria, a youth-led blockchain project launched to track public funds in real time. They no longer waited for permission. They built, they challenged, they roared. 5 years after the infamous Obama speech, a meeting took place under complete secrecy, not in Geneva, not in New York, but in Ouagadougou. In a circular room, no cameras, no interpreters, just 10 African leaders, mostly under 45. They called themselves the Council of Quiet Fires. Each of them had survived something: a coup, a smear campaign, an assassination attempt. They came not to pledge loyalty to Traoré, but to discuss something bigger. Then, he vanished. One morning, Traoré's motorcade left the capital for a rural development visit. It never arrived. No crash, no announcement. The state reported a communications breakdown. For 48 hours, the world held its breath. Markets dipped. Hashtags exploded. Foreign media speculated everything from coups to cardiac arrest. But the people, they didn't panic. Instead, something remarkable happened. Across Burkina Faso, villages lit fires in their squares and told stories of the lion. In Kenya, young men painted murals of him walking through clouds. In South Africa, students marched not in protest, but in silent tribute, because for the first time they didn't fear what had happened to a man. They feared what would happen to the movement if they forgot who they were without him. Then, on the third day, a video appeared, grainy, dim, recorded from a handheld Ibrahim Traore, standing in the middle of a small village, smiling beside a group of children, holding a shovel. "I came to build," he said, not to broadcast. He had chosen to disconnect, not for secrecy, for clarity. He had been digging a foundation for a free hospital, with his own hands. 10 years after his original speech, Barack Obama sent a video message to the African Union's Youth Summit. His hair was grayer, his tone softer, but his words just as sharp. "I said once that a lion walks in Africa. I was wrong. Today, lions walk everywhere. Some wear uniforms. Some carry books. Some plant seeds, but they all roar the same way. With purpose, with love, with no need for applause." The hall stood in thunderous silence, and somewhere, beneath an acacia tree in the Burkina heat, Ibrahim watched the message on a solar-powered tablet. He didn't smile. He just whispered, "It's working." Eventually, a new symbol began to appear. Quietly at first. Not a lion, but a paw print carved inside a sun. It was drawn on walls, printed on shirts, etched into tree trunks across borders. It didn't mean power. It meant reminder that you don't have to roar to be a lion. Sometimes showing up is enough. Sometimes refusing to be bought is enough. Sometimes being kind in a world built on fear is the loudest roar of all. A continent no longer led from the outside in. What was whispered in that room changed everything. A shared fund was created, seeded not by banks, but by national resources pooled together. A cybersecurity treaty was signed to protect whistleblowers across borders. And a resolution was made. If one lion is attacked, 10 others will stand. It wasn't a military alliance, it was a moral one. Time has a way of silencing even the loudest storms. But not this one. A decade had passed since Obama first called him Africa's lion. The world had changed, but the roar still echoed. Not because of Ibrahim Traoré's titles or uniforms, but because of what came after the silence. He had stopped granting interviews years ago. The world kept asking, but he had already said all he needed. Instead, he built. Quietly, stubbornly. Clinics, schools, codes of ethics. Not monuments to himself, but frameworks that could survive him. And that was the plan all along. One by one, new leaders rose, not in his shadow, but in his light. From Senegal to Somalia, young reformers took office quoting his early speeches. Rwanda, a grassroots network, used his rural development blueprint to lift 2 million people above poverty. In Ethiopia, women-led councils structured governance using the Lion Mandate, a document leaked from one of Traoré's earliest private sessions. None of this was officially linked to him. He never claimed credit. But those who studied his path knew he was building a new continent without ever owning it. He didn't want to be followed. He wanted to be surpassed. Then, quietly, came the illness. It began with fatigue. Then weight loss, then blackouts. At first, he dismissed it. He had always worked past pain. But by the time he collapsed during a late-night field visit, it could no longer be hidden. Doctors called it neurological collapse syndrome, brought on by overwork, stress, and years of untreated trauma from previous assassination attempts. They recommended rest. He refused treatment overseas. "If I die," he reportedly said, "let it be where I lived." The public didn't know yet, but his team did, and so did those closest to him. His days were numbered, but so were his regrets. Before stepping back from public life, he recorded, "One last message, not for the press, not for politics, but for the people." It wasn't a speech, it was a story. He spoke of the day he first heard Obama say his name. He described the silence in the room, the weight of words, the burden of being seen by the world not as a man, but as a movement. And then he said this: "Lions don't roar to be feared. They roar to remind the forest it still belongs to them. If I have done one thing in this life, I hope it is this. I reminded you that this continent, this voice, this dignity, it was always ours." He asked that the video not be released until a year after his passing. He died 5 months later, surrounded by farmers, teachers, and his old military unit. No grand palaces, no last-minute flights, just peace. When the news broke, it wasn't headlines. It was heartbreak. Markets paused. Borders held vigils. In dozens of cities, people walked barefoot for miles to touch lion statues or lay paw-shaped candles at community centers. Obama issued a rare statement. "The lion is gone, but the pride is awake. May we honor him not with applause, but with action." In Ouagadougou, a girl named after Traoré stood in front of her school and recited the national anthem with a lion symbol drawn across her hand in ink. She was 8. Her voice didn't tremble, and all across Africa, children repeated the phrase etched onto a stone wall near his burial site. He didn't want a throne. He wanted a trail. Years passed. Africa changed. But every time a young leader refused a bribe, every time a child learned history not from colonizers but from griots, every time a woman stood up and said, "We decide what tomorrow looks like," the world heard it. The roar, not from a single lion, but from millions. And long after history had tried to simplify him into a chapter or quote, the forest still whispered his name. Ibrahim Traore, the man who made Africa remember its voice.